As the sunlight fades into autumn gloom, the rustling of leaves in the cool, dim air gives proof of the coming season. Overhead, the insidious cackle of witches flying pierce the darkness. Horrid figures of silent phantoms stalk desolate paths and candle-lit hallways. And all manner of things, goblins, banshees, and vampires, hide amongst the growing shadows. Thus begins October. Blackwater Media presents Halloween Horrors. I had a strange experience as a kid in Mexico City one summer. You see, every summer we would visit family in Mexico, so I was very familiar with the house we were staying in. I was 8 years old, and due to lack of space, I slept in a twin bed with my mother. One night, I had a hard time falling asleep. I was feeling very scared, but I didn't know why. Nothing had happened. After my parents had fallen asleep, a weird ticking started in the room, on the side of the room where there was an open window. The ticking sound wasn't loud, and if I'd been asleep, I doubt it would have woken me up. The sound started by the window and slowly moved towards me. Since I was sleeping with my mother in a twin bed, I was facing the opposite side of the room where the sound was coming from. I was getting more and more frightened, but kept telling myself it wasn't anything to worry about, and I didn't want to move and wake my mother up. But the ticking got louder and closer, and it kind of sounded almost like footsteps, but metallic footsteps. The ticking was kind of slow, so it seemed like something was walking slowly towards me. I heard it come right up to the bed and stop, and I really felt the presence of something, and had become really terrified by that point. I knew something was behind me, and it felt sinister. Also, I could hear a low-level humming or buzzing sound, and beeping as well. I finally worked up the courage to gently turn and look, and there was something there, but it's hard as hell to describe. I saw a robot, an adult, human-sized robot. It was silver in color, and it was fucking big. It was just standing there. And here's what's crazy. It kind of reminded me of the robot in Lost in Space. That was about the only reference I had at that age. It didn't move, but I could still hear the humming, and it felt totally evil. I didn't know what to do, but at least I was in the same room with my parents, so I just ignored it. As you might guess, it took me a hell of a long time to fall asleep knowing it was still there, but I kept my back turned to it and eventually fell asleep. You know, looking back on it, I realize now that this thing, this horrifying mechanical terror, had to be something not of this world. I had a lot of disturbing paranormal experiences as a child. One of them had to do with hearing footsteps in the hall at night, and I heard them many, many nights. They were loud, almost clanking footsteps, and it was always coming to my bedroom door. Then the sound would just stop outside my door, and that's all that would happen. Sometimes I would leave the door open and look, but never saw anything. I felt better keeping the door closed. One night when I was 13 years old, I heard the footsteps, but they moved slower than normal, and I felt a whole lot more fear than normal. The door was closed, so I wasn't too scared. I thought it would be like other nights when it just stopped right outside my door, but it didn't stop. I heard the steps come into my room as if the door was open. I heard the steps stop right next to my bed. It was dark, but I could see what looked like a stereotypical devil with horns, burned skin, horse legs and all. It just stood there breathing, and I think looking at me. At that point, I couldn't move or scream or anything. I think I passed out because the next thing I remember, it was daylight. Also, after this experience, I never heard the footsteps in the hallway again. Let me tell you something. I've never liked stuffed animals. Even as a small child, I didn't like stuffed animals and was afraid of them. Of course, people would give me one for my birthday or Christmas, but I would find a way to get rid of it. I would usually throw it away, bury it, or leave it somewhere like at a friend's house or yard. I was afraid of them because I always felt that not only would they look at me, but they looked at me with contempt. I thought they would try to hurt me the first chance they got. I often saw their eyes move and follow me, or that their eyes glowed in the dark. Of course, no one ever believed me, and I was still given those damn things as gifts, but I would always find a way to get rid of it. Anyway, one day a friend of the family gave me a giant stuffed turtle. It was so damn big that I couldn't bury it or fit it in the trash can. Trash cans were smaller back then, not huge like nowadays. I did try to take it to a friend's house in the neighborhood, but her parents told her to give it back to me. I hated that thing, but could not get rid of it, so I left it in the farthest point from my bedroom. I noticed that the eyes didn't follow me or glow in the dark, and I felt relief and started to actually like that giant turtle. One night, when I was getting ready to go to bed and was putting my homework together in the den, I thought I noticed it looking at me, but decided it was just my imagination. I was getting up to leave the den, and I thought I should say goodnight in a friendly way to the giant turtle as some kind of proof to myself that it was nothing to be afraid of. It's a child's logic. As I began to walk past it, I smiled at it and said, "Good night." And not only did its eyes follow me, but it moved its head to watch me walk by. I knew it was not my imagination this time and ran those last few steps to the kitchen. Then I thought, no, maybe I really didn't see that. So I peeked around the corner of the kitchen to look into the den again, and it was still looking at me and even seemed to be smiling, but in an evil way. Next day, I cut the giant turtle open, emptied out the little white balls it was stuffed with, wadded up the material, and stuffed it all in a big trash bag and put it in the trash can in the alley. I hated that goddamn turtle. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. He smiled as he sipped at his coffee. It had been an excellent hike. He was glad his friend had recommended coming to the Hanging Hills in Connecticut. Not the first place that had come to his mind when he considered a vacation. But it was beautiful here. When his friend arrived tomorrow, they would tackle some of the more challenging terrain. "Did you have a nice hike?" asked the innkeeper as she refilled his cup. "Yes, indeed. I had some unexpected company," he said with a smile. "Really? I thought you were the only one crazy enough to go hiking in the rain," she teased. "It was a little black dog," he said. "Cute fellow. Followed me all the way up the mountain and down again." He looked up from his coffee to see the innkeeper's face had gone pale. "A black dog?" she asked. "That's not good." "Why not?" "Well, we have a saying around here. If a man shall meet the black dog once, it shall be for joy. And if twice, it shall be for sorrow. And the third time he shall die." And he laughed. "That's just a superstition. That's what Mr. Pinchon said. He saw the black dog twice. The second time he saw the dog, the friend he was climbing with fell to his death. And later, Mr. Pinchon decided to climb the same mountain, and he died too. Everyone here believes he saw the dog just before he fell. It's nonsense. Bullshit. It's just a cute stray." She shrugged and took the coffee pot over to the other customers. His friend arrived the next morning, and they both laughed at the story of the black dog. They set out on their climb, and about halfway up the mountain, he looked up and saw the black dog. "There's the dog," he called to his friend. And then his foot slipped, and he plunged down the side of the hill, desperately grabbing at saplings and rocks, trying to halt his descent. It seemed to take forever for him to stop sliding. There was a stabbing pain in his leg. When he looked at it, his head was swimming. It was bent at an odd angle. They had to send in a mountain rescue team to get him down. At the hospital, they told him his leg was broken in 2 places, and he was lucky it wasn't worse. "You know, that was a very strange fall," said his friend uneasily. "You don't really think it had anything to do with that black dog?" He looked down at the cast that extended all the way up to his hip. "I don't know, but I don't really want to find out. Next time, let's go to Colorado." And his friend agreed. One night in my early 20s, I went to bed and fell asleep as usual. Now, during the night, I had a dream that someone was trying to choke me and break my neck. And it was one of those extremely realistic dreams. Now, this bad dream woke me up, and the next few things I'm going to say took place very quickly. I felt an extraordinarily bad and sharp pain on my neck, which made me think I was still dreaming. But I realized that I wasn't, because I could tell I was in my bed and in the dark. I put my hand on the area of my neck where it was hurting, and I felt something like a rock. I grabbed the rock and threw it across the room. I heard it hit the wall. I touched my neck again, and it was wet and still really hurting. And I thought, what the hell did I throw at the wall? So I jumped up, turned on the light, and looked in the mirror. Blood was dripping down my neck, and I had blood on both of my hands. I looked around to see what I'd thrown at the wall, and quickly saw a giant beetle on its back, struggling and kicking its legs. This thing was fucking huge. It was at least 2 inches long and at least 1 inch fat. It was dark brown and had those big scary pinchers or mandibles or whatever the hell they're called. I grabbed a heavy glass vase and used it to trap the beetle until I could take care of my wound and figure out what to do with it. I went into the bathroom, washed my hands and neck, and I could then see that the damn thing had literally cut my throat about an inch horizontally right in the middle of my goddamn neck. I was shaking and panicking and having a hard time believing that this just happened. And how on earth did that thing get in the house? I took care of the cut and finally calmed myself down. I decided that in the morning, I would throw that thing out by the creek, even though I wanted to kill it. It was still alive in the morning, and my skin was crawling when I scooped it into the vase, covered the top, and asked my roommate to help me dispose of it. Looking back, I wonder, should I have killed that damn thing? Was that a paranormal experience with an evil entity? Or just a really strange case of bad luck with a bug? This is a bit of a complicated story. It goes across generations, and there are certain words that are not supposed to be used anymore, I guess. My grandmother bought a very old house that was in bad shape, but she transformed it into a beautiful and wonderful home over the years. And she owned the house for over 30 years, but it was haunted. Throughout the years, she let her children and grandchildren live there whenever they or we needed. There was one big bedroom in the back corner of the house that first was my aunt's bedroom and then my cousin's room. In between those times, it was a guest room that I often slept in. I had strange, bad experiences in that room that at the time, I wasn't sure if they were real or dreams. Now, I convinced myself that they were nightmares, but they felt very real. I dreamt about or saw a little person, specifically a little man. The man was very similar to a regular person with dwarfism, but still a little smaller, and his head was as wide as the rest of his body. He must have been about 2.5 feet tall. He would run around the room and laugh. He would run and slide under my bed, and he would also float. Now, in the jargon of that day, this thing looked like a little, evil, creepy fucking midget. He would float by the side of my bed, reach out for me, but not touch me, and laugh at me. He never said anything or did anything else, but it all felt very threatening, and of course, I was terrified. Now, like I said, in those days, we didn't call them little people. We used the term midget, but out of respect, I've learned to use the preferred term, little people. I had many other paranormal experiences as a child, but learned that no one believed me, so I stopped telling anyone about these things, and I never told anyone about this little creature until I was an adult. I was talking about that old house with my aunt who lived in that room as a child, and I asked her if she'd ever had any strange experiences, and she told me that there was a little man who would float by the side of her bed and laugh at her. And I thought to myself, holy shit. She also told me that he would act like he was going to sexually assault her, but then stop and just laugh at her. And I told her that I almost had the same experiences, and as we described him, we described the exact same entity. It was a horrifying realization that my nightmares about a little man were not nightmares like I convinced myself. It was just horrifying either way that we both experienced that frightening little man. A few years later, a younger cousin was living in that house and in the same bedroom. One night when I was visiting, it was time for her to go to bed, but she was refusing to go and crying. She said she didn't want to go to bed alone because she was afraid of the little man in the room who she thought was going to hurt her. Now, I asked her about the little man, and she told me he would run and slide under the bed and laugh, and then float beside her and pretend like he was going to grab her, but never did. She was terrified. I didn't tell her about my experiences or our aunt's experiences until many, many years later. It's interesting how sharing those experiences helped us feel better, helped us to know that he was real. We weren't crazy or making it up. That house was really, really haunted by a horrible, miserable little goddamn creature. I learned that in the traditions of Mexico and the southwestern United States, there is a creature called El Duende. They're small elf or gnome type creatures that live inside the walls of homes. And what's more horrifying, they prefer the inside walls of children's bedrooms. One morning, a man and his two sons went fishing in the woods that stretched for miles beyond their own backyard. His wife watched from the kitchen window as they disappeared into the trees. Later that day, the wife began to become worried, for her family was not back, and she hadn't heard a word from them since they left. Dinner had been ready hours ago. After another hour of waiting, she decided to go out and look for them. By now, it was almost completely dark. She ran through the woods calling out their names, and she got no replies. It was some time before she came to a stream. There, lying at the bank of the stream, were the bodies of her husband and oldest son, with a knife sticking in each of their chests. It was obvious that they'd been murdered. But where was her younger son, a boy of only 11? After a long time of silent vigil prayer and mourning, she decided to head back home. For now she realized the person who killed her two family members was still out there in the woods. Frightened out of her wits, she ran frantically through the woods until she reached her house. She went to her next-door neighbor's house and told her what had happened, but swore her to secrecy because she didn't want anyone else finding out about this tragic event. To avoid the press the next day, her neighbor helped her smuggle the bodies out of the stream and buried them both in the woods right by the stream. The woman was still in search of her younger son, however. She'd searched the woods the entire morning and found no trace of him. Her hopes were that he had found shelter and would return home when he knew it was safe. She'd been digging her husband and son's grave all day and was getting tired from the work. When she was finished digging, her neighbor offered to go back to the house and retrieve 2 blankets to wrap the bodies in. The new widow told her to get the one off of her bed. The neighbor went inside. Nearly 3/4 of an hour passed by, and the neighbor still had not returned. The woman decided to go back to see that she was okay. She went up the stairs and was horrified at the sight in her bedroom. She screamed, for there on her bed, near the open window, was the severed head of her youngest son and a knife. Her neighbor was nowhere in sight. One night when I was in my mid-20s, I went to bed as usual. I laid in bed for a while just thinking about things, and then I heard 3 distinct knocks on my window. Now that was strange, because that window faced the backyard, and we had a dog who barked at everything, and she wasn't barking at all. I got up and looked out that window, but it was dark and I couldn't see anything. I went around to the TV room where the back door was and turned on the outside light. I looked around and there was nothing except our dog just laying there on her bed on the porch. I had a bad feeling like something bad was around or some kind of negative energy. I finally fell asleep, but I woke up very early when it was barely light out, but there was enough light to see in my room. I had an even stronger bad feeling than before and tried to move to look around, but I couldn't move at all. I was basically paralyzed except for my eyes. When I looked around to the foot of my bed, I saw an old woman dressed in rags. She looked kind of like she was from another time period. She was leaning over the foot of my bed, looking at me and extending one arm towards me. And she was saying, "Come with me. Come with me." I felt like she was trying hard to convince me that she was friendly, but I had a very bad feeling about her. Actually, I was super horrified, but I couldn't move or do anything but look. Then she reacted as if something scared her. She stood straight and looked to her right as if something was there. I looked in that direction and couldn't see anything there, but it was very clear to me that whatever she saw really scared her. She looked back at me as if asking for help, but I wouldn't have helped her even if I could have. Then she disappeared. As soon as she was gone, I was able to move again. I got up and looked around the house and backyard and didn't see anything strange. Even our dog was fine, and again, not barking. I never saw that old woman again, and I'm grateful to whatever it was that scared her away that night. Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Lester, and I want to tell you about a new membership opportunity from Blackwater Media. Now yes, you can sign up for the regular Swamp Hunter Society membership at $4.99 a month and have access to the premium content. But you also have the option of getting the Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. That's right, with a one-time payment of just $49.99, you can have the same access to the same premium content, early releases, at a savings of almost $10 off of a regular membership. So if you enjoy the finest in paranormal encrypted horror, head on over to blackwatermedia.net and get your Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. If you grew up in the Gullah country in South Carolina and Georgia, you've heard the tale of the Platt-Eye, a grotesque creature with one large red eye and short, stubby body and long, freakish legs. Platt-Eyes were shapeshifters, able to change their appearance and size as needed. One second they could be the size of a cat, the next they were as big as a bull. But they never could get it right. You could tell it was a Platt-Eye because it wouldn't look right, and it would have glowing red eyes. The Platt-Eye lives in the swamps and deep woods and hollows of the South. They like to hunt along dark country roads where the light barely invades. They only hunt at night, meaning you never want to be in their territory when the sun goes down. If you were, it's likely they'd draw you into a trap. The old folks would always say things to us as youngsters. "Boy, you best not go into them woods at night, lest the Platt-Eye get you." Or, "Boy, when the sun goes down, don't you leave that road for nothing till you get home. Platt-Eye's out there." I've even heard, "Don't be down in that swamp no time. The sun ain't shining bright and there's a plaid-eye out there." And I can tell you, sometimes you should listen to the old folks. See, I passed that same story along to kids as I became a parent. But youngsters today, they know everything. I tell the stories just like I'm telling you, but they fall on deaf ears. One such youngster was a little boy that I'll call Donald. They called him Donnie, and he was a bit of a know-it-all. Well, anyway, one night in October, close to Halloween, we had a festival in my town. It's called Cypress Garden Swamp. Of course, I was there spinning my yarns and enjoying a bit of good food. I told that boy, "Whatever you do, don't go playing in that swamp over yonder. If the gators don't get you, the plaid-eye surely will." Turns out, he didn't listen to me. Some kids dared Donnie to go down into the swamp, and he said he was the bravest, and they told him to prove it. He said he'd go, but only if he could take his friend Mikey with him. Now, most of this is what the boy Mikey told me when he came home running. But they went in a good 15 minutes and nothing happened. Then they started hearing this eerie sound and the smell of something awful. Mikey told Donnie he thought they should head back, but Donnie didn't want to. And that's when they came across a dog the size of a donkey, he said. It had 2 tails and long tusks and glowing red eyes. Well, Mikey went to run, but Donnie insisted he was running the other direction. A few minutes later, Mikey burst out of the woods, and all we could hear was him screaming, "It's going to get him! It's going to get him!" Now, it took me a minute to calm the boy down, but when he explained what happened, I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and led a dozen men into the swamp to find the boy. It didn't take us long to figure out what direction he was in, because we could hear his screams, blood-curdling screams like he was being ripped apart. We ran through that cypress swamp as fast as we could, looking behind every stump and tree. We found him curled up on a bank, shaking back and forth. His skin was a shade darker, and his hair was almost white. He kept muttering something that didn't make any sense and staring off into the swamp. I pointed my flashlight towards where he was looking, and there was a bobtail cat with red eyes and wings staring back at me. I raised my rifle and tried to get a bead on it, but it was gone before I could pull the trigger. It disappeared into the woods like it never existed. Donnie's in a mental hospital now, and he hadn't spoken a word since that night. Some say the old plaid-eye drove him mad with fear, and it's waiting on him to come back so it can finish him off. So, if you go into the woods at night, and you hear a sound that doesn't sound right, you might best run towards the light, because the plaid-eye could be coming for you. And if he catches you, you'll never see another sunrise. I live on a small farm far out in the country. Every year, my dad puts out scarecrows in our fields because he thinks they're effective in not only keeping the crows out, but evil spirits as well. I guess he's a little superstitious. The scarecrows he sets out are the same ones year after year, and after so much wear and tear, they were showing their age. This October started out just like any other October. The weather was turning cool, and the leaves were beginning to change into brilliant orange and yellow colors. One Saturday, us kids got together and decided to make a new scarecrow. Being creative, we gathered our supplies and got to work. This scarecrow was to be different. This was my special design. I wanted a creepy scarecrow, much scarier than the others. Hours later, we finished up. Indeed, he was the ugliest, most frightening scarecrow I'd ever seen. And I was so proud. Mom called us for supper, so we planted the scarecrow out in the cornfield, where I could see it from my bedroom window. Not giving it any more thought, we went in and ate. And soon the wind picked up, and it began lightning. No storm was forecasted, but it looked like we were in for a rough night. Light rain began falling as I went up to bed. I was worried about my new scarecrow, so I peeked out of my window. What I saw shocked the shit out of me. He was there all right, but not where we'd placed him. It appeared to me that he was several feet to the right. Puzzled, I stood at the window and watched intently. The lightning was bright, and every time it flashed, I could see my scarecrow. The problem was, it looked as if he was moving when the sky was dark, only to turn up in another spot when the sky lit up. Thinking that I must be imagining things, I put my pajamas on and went to bed. Later on, a loud crack of thunder woke me up. By now, the rain was pounding down, making it difficult to see out my window. I slipped on my shoes and snuck outside to check on my scarecrow. Not sure where he was, I walked around in the thunderstorm, half blinded by the cold, stinging rain. Clumsily, I stumbled over a fallen branch and fell face down into a damn patch of mud. When I looked up, there was my scarecrow glaring down at me. His eyes were huge and glowing red. I couldn't pick myself up fast enough. I ran screaming to the house and never looked back. After tossing and turning the rest of the night, I woke up to a bright sunshine and the smell of bacon. Not wanting to tell my parents what happened, I sat quietly and ate breakfast. Anxious and apprehensive, I then went outside to look around. My dad was already looking for storm damage to the buildings, but I was looking for my scarecrow. I have to admit, out of confusion, I began crying, not because of losing the scarecrow, but because of pure, unadulterated fear. My father told me that he probably blew away and would be discovered in a field during harvest. But I knew better. Somehow, some way, that scarecrow came alive. And how, I don't know. Well, of course, this was years and years ago. A lot of time has passed. And to this day, I've never seen that scarecrow. What the hell happened that stormy night? Do scarecrows really keep out evil spirits? Or can they be possessed by one? I don't live on that farm anymore, but I've never ventured outside during a thunderstorm again. My wife and I have a friend who lives in another state who said she wanted to bring her sister and daughter to come for a visit and stay at our house for about a week. Of course, we said yes, and she told us they would arrive in early August. My wife busied herself with house cleaning and went shopping to get extra food, toilet paper, etc. When August rolled around, she said they changed it to early September. Now, we're retired and flexible, so we said, okay, sure. Then she moved it out a few more weeks. Long story short, they didn't show up until late October and stayed over 3 weeks. Now listen, we've visited and stayed with them several times over the years before, but never for more than a few days each time. We didn't know how to ask them to leave without hurting our friendship, and kept thinking that they would leave soon. I know that we didn't handle the situation well. The truth is, we became very angry and impatient with them. And they didn't even seem to notice that they had outstayed their welcome. I mean, they way outstayed their welcome. Anyway, one night after we all went to bed and were asleep, we heard them screaming. My wife and I went to see what happened. They told us first they heard a man's voice whispering their names, then saw a light flash in the room, and then heard a very loud crash. They thought the mirror on the wall in the room they were staying in had fallen, but it was still on the wall, not even cracked. Now, we didn't hear a loud noise at all, just their screams. They were so damn scared, they slept in the living room that night. The next day, they packed up and left. One morning, a man and his 2 sons went fishing in the woods that stretched for miles beyond their own backyard. His wife watched from the kitchen window as they disappeared into the trees. Later that day, the wife began to become worried, for her family was not back, and she hadn't heard a word from them since they left. Dinner had been ready hours ago. After another hour of waiting, she decided to go out and look for them. By now, it was almost completely dark. She ran through the woods calling out their names, and she got no replies. It was some time before she came to a stream. There, lying at the bank of the stream, were the bodies of her husband and oldest son, with a knife sticking in each of their chests. It was obvious that they'd been murdered. But where was her younger son, a boy of only 11? After a long time of silent vigil prayer and mourning, she decided to head back home. For now she realized the person who killed her 2 family members was still out there in the woods. Frightened out of her wits, she ran frantically through the woods until she reached her house. She went to her next-door neighbor's house and told her what had happened, but swore her to secrecy because she didn't want anyone else finding out about this tragic event. To avoid the press the next day, her neighbor helped her smuggle the bodies out of the stream and buried them both in the woods right by the stream. The woman was still in search of her younger son, however. She'd searched the woods the entire morning and found no trace of him. Her hopes were that he had found shelter and would return home when he knew it was safe. She'd been digging her husband and son's grave all day and was getting tired from the work. When she was finished digging, her neighbor offered to go back to the house and retrieve 2 blankets to wrap the bodies in. The new widow told her to get the one off of her bed. The neighbor went inside. Nearly 3/4 of an hour passed by, and the neighbor still had not returned. The woman decided to go back to see that she was okay. She went up the stairs and was horrified at the sight in her bedroom. She screamed, for there on her bed, near the open window, was the severed head of her youngest son and a knife. Her neighbor was nowhere in sight.